He had sawdust on his hands and an 8-year-old daughter asleep in the back room when the most powerful woman in the city walked through his door and told him she needed a husband by Thursday. Not a real one, just convincing enough to fool a boardroom full of sharks. Ethan Cross said no. Then she told him that someone inside her company was tearing it apart from the inside, and if the deal collapsed, 4,000 people would lose their jobs before Christmas. He said no again. Then he looked at his daughter's drawing taped to the wall. A house, 2 people, the word family written in crayon. And he stopped talking. This is the story of a man who built things with his hands and a woman who had forgotten what it felt like to come home. If you're watching this, hit like, drop a comment with your city, and follow along to the end. I want to see how far this story travels. The workshop smelled like pine resin and linseed oil, which was, as far as Ethan Cross was concerned, the way a room was supposed to smell. He'd converted the garage behind his rental house on Delwood Avenue into the shop 4 years ago, after the divorce, after the company layoff, after the period he didn't talk about, the 6 months that existed in his memory as a kind of gray fog with Ava's face floating somewhere in the middle of it. She had been 4 years old then, small enough to fall asleep in the chest he was sanding, curled up like a cat in a box. He'd built that chest for a woman 3 streets over who'd seen his work at a church sale. $40 and a box of oatmeal cookies. That was how the business started. Now he charged $1,200 for a custom dining table and had a 4-month backlog. It wasn't wealth. It was something better than wealth. It was a schedule he controlled, work he could stand behind, and every afternoon at 3:15, Ava Cross came through the side door with her backpack hanging half off one shoulder and her shoes already untied and said something like, "Dad, can we get a dog?" Or, "Dad, Mia says I have too many books in my cubby," and the workday was over. That Tuesday in October, she said neither of those things. She dropped her bag by the door, climbed up onto the stool she'd claimed as her reading throne, and pulled out a chapter book without a word. He watched her from the corner of his eye while he ran the orbital sander across a cabinet door. 3rd grade. She'd started 3rd grade 6 weeks ago and had already read her way through the school's AR system and moved on to the public library's junior chapter collection. Her teacher had sent home a note that said, "Ava is a remarkable reader, and we may need to discuss differentiated programming." Ethan had read it twice, put it on the fridge, and felt something shift inside his chest that he didn't have a clean word for. Pride, probably. Mixed with the particular low-grade fear that lives in parents who know their kid is going to exceed them in every measurable way. "You eat your snack on the bus?" he asked. "Graham crackers and apple juice," she said without looking up. "Again? You like graham crackers?" "Not every day for 6 days." He turned off the sander. "I'll get different snacks this weekend." "I made a list," she said, and turned a page. He almost smiled. She kept a running list on the back of a school bookmark. Snacks she wanted, books she'd heard about, things she noticed that needed fixing around the house. She told him once, very seriously, that the gutter over the kitchen window was pulling away from the fascia and he should look at it before winter. She was 7 at the time. He'd climbed up the same afternoon and found she was right. He picked up the sander again, then stopped when headlights swept across the shop window. It was nearly 6. He wasn't expecting anyone. The car that pulled up to the curb was not the kind of car that usually appeared on Delwood Avenue. It was a black Audi sedan, current model, the kind that still looked expensive even in bad light. It sat at the curb for a moment, long enough that Ethan set down the sander and watched. And then the door opened. The woman who stepped out was dressed in a charcoal blazer and dark slacks, her hair pulled back in a way that looked precise rather than casual. She was young, younger than he'd expected, though he hadn't been expecting anything. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment and looked at the workshop sign. Cross Woodcraft, Custom Furniture and Repair, with an expression that was hard to read at this distance. Not contempt, something more like disbelief. Then she walked to his door and knocked, even though it was standing open. "Hi," she said. "Are you Ethan Cross?" Her voice was steady. Not warm exactly, but controlled. The voice of someone who'd learned to manage the sound of themselves in rooms where it mattered. She was holding a leather folder against her chest like a shield. "Yeah," he said. She stepped inside without being invited. Not rudely, or not entirely rudely, but like someone accustomed to the assumption that rooms would admit her. She looked around at the shop, The half-finished cabinet, the tool wall, the rack of lumber sorted by species, Ava sitting on her stool with her book. "I'm Charlotte Vaughn," she said. "I run Vaughn Group." He knew the name. Vaughn Group was the largest private logistics and infrastructure holding company in the state, maybe in the region. He knew it the way you knew the name of the mountain that sat behind your town. Present, large, not particularly relevant to daily life. "Okay," he said. She seemed to have expected more than that. A flicker of something moved across her face. Recalculation, maybe. And then it was gone. "I need to speak with you privately." He glanced at Ava, who had not looked up from her book. "She's 8. She reads." "I can see that," Charlotte said. She looked at Ava, and for a brief moment something uncertain crossed her face, as if she had encountered an element she hadn't accounted for. Then she looked back at Ethan. "What I need to discuss is time-sensitive. I'll be direct." "Go ahead." She opened the leather folder. Inside was a single sheet dense with typed text, and a yellow tab at the bottom right that said "Sign here." "I need someone to act as my fiancé for approximately 6 weeks, starting Thursday." The shop went quiet. Even the sounds from the street seemed to recede. Ethan looked at the document, then at her. "You drove to a furniture workshop on Delwood Avenue to propose a fake engagement. I was referred to you by Marcus Webb." But Marcus Webb was a contractor he'd done 3 jobs for in the past 2 years. Good guy, paid on time, talked too much. Ethan was going to have a conversation with Marcus Webb. "Marcus knows a carpenter," Ethan said. "He doesn't know anything about—" He gestured vaguely at the folder. "He said you were the most steady person he'd ever worked with," Charlotte said. "That you didn't rattle. That you did what you said you would do and nothing you didn't." She paused. "Right now, steady is the only qualification I care about." Ava turned a page. Ethan pulled a shop stool out from under the bench and sat down, which put him below eye level with Charlotte, which he didn't mind. He crossed his arms. "Tell me what's actually happening." Something shifted in Charlotte's posture. Not vulnerability, not quite, but a loosening of whatever she'd been carrying since she knocked on the door. She closed the folder and held it at her side. "My company is finalizing a merger with Meridian Logistics International," she said. "It's been 18 months in negotiation. The combined entity would control distribution infrastructure across 14 countries and employ close to 30,000 people, including 4,000 in this state alone. The final signing is in 11 days. That sounds like it's going well? One of the conditions of the merger, written into the final agreement by Meridian's board, is what they call a stability clause. It's common in international deals of this scale. It's meant to ensure that key leadership won't immediately depart or destabilize post-merger. She looked at him. "The clause, as written, requires me to present evidence of personal stability, a committed partnership, an engagement, specifically." Ethan stared at her. "You're telling me a billion-dollar merger has a clause that requires the CEO to have a boyfriend? Fiancé. And yes, it's archaic and arguably discriminatory, and my legal team is preparing a challenge, but the challenge would take 8 months minimum, and the signing is in 11 days. Her jaw tightened slightly. "I've been advised that the clause was specifically drafted to target me." "By who?" "I don't know. That's part of what I need to find out." He absorbed this. The sander sat on the bench beside him. Somewhere outside, a dog was barking. Ava turned another page. "So you came here," he said, "because Marcus Webb said I didn't rattle. And because anyone inside my world would become a liability or a target the moment this arrangement became known. I need someone outside, someone who doesn't want anything from me." He looked at her directly. "You don't know what I want." "You haven't asked for money yet," she said. Usually that's the first question. That landed somewhere. Not offensively. She hadn't meant it as an insult. She meant it as fact, and he could tell the difference. He thought about it for a moment. "I'm not interested," he said. She had been prepared for that. He could see it. She didn't flinch, didn't argue, just nodded once. She reached into the folder and produced a second document, smaller, which she set on the bench beside him. A number was printed at the top, $250,000. "For 6 weeks," she said. "Expenses covered, wardrobe provided, all public appearances scripted. You'd have full legal protection." I heard you the first time, he said. He didn't pick up the paper. I have a daughter. I have a business. I have a life that works. I understand. I don't think you do, he said without heat. I don't think you came here and saw a guy in a workshop on Delwood Avenue and thought, this is a life that works. I think you thought, this is someone easy to offer money to. Charlotte's mouth opened slightly, then it closed. Ava, without looking up from her book, said, Dad? Yeah, Bug. Your phone's buzzing on the charger. He'd heard it. He ignored it. Charlotte looked at Ava for a moment. Then she said quietly, You're right. I'm sorry. That's exactly what I thought. She picked up the document with the number on it and folded it back into the folder. I didn't mean it as a slight. I meant it as a practical calculation, and those aren't the same thing, but I see how it would feel like one. That was unexpected. He hadn't expected the apology, and he hadn't expected it to sound real. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he said, Who do you think is sabotaging you from inside the company? She looked at him. What makes you say sabotage? Because a merger clause that targets one person doesn't right itself. And you said you need to find out who. That's not a legal problem. That's a trust problem. Something moved in her eyes, relief maybe, or the recognition of being understood. It was brief. I have suspicions. I can't act on them without more information. And being inside the merger process, isolated, running everything on my own, she stopped. I can't see clearly anymore. I'm too close to it. You want a second pair of eyes, he said. I want someone who's not afraid of me, she said. Everyone in my company, my board, my social circle, they're all operating with an agenda. You have no agenda. You want nothing from me. That's the most valuable thing anyone has offered me in 5 years. He thought about his daughter on her stool. He thought about the 4-month backlog and the cabinet door that still needed sanding. He thought about the 6-month gray period that ended when he realized the only thing left to do was build something. I'm not going to wear a suit, he said. Charlotte blinked. What? If I'm meeting your board, I'll dress appropriately. But I'm not putting on a costume, and I'm not lying about who I am or what I do. She studied him. The whole premise requires people believing you chose me, he said. People will believe that more if I'm actually myself than if I'm pretending to be someone from your world. Anyone from your world would see through that in 20 minutes. She was quiet for a long moment. You've thought about this more than I expected. I just decided, he said, 2 minutes ago. So you're saying yes. I'm saying I'll hear the rest of it, in the morning, without the contract. He stood up, which put him back at full height. He had 4 inches on her at least. Ava needs dinner and I have a cabinet door to finish. Come back tomorrow at 9. Charlotte Vaughn, CEO of the largest private holding company in the region, stood in his workshop with a leather folder at her side, and for a moment she looked genuinely unsure what to do. He wondered how often that happened. 9 o'clock, she said finally. Bring coffee. The place 2 blocks north on Millard is good. She looked at him for another beat. Then she walked out, got into the black Audi and drove away. Ava turned a page. Dad? Yeah. Who was that? Someone who needs help. Are you going to help her? He picked up the orbital sander. I don't know yet. Ava seemed to consider this with the seriousness she brought to most things. Her voice sounds tired, she said. He looked at his daughter. She was back to reading. She hadn't looked up once. Charlotte drove 6 blocks before she pulled over. She didn't cry. She hadn't cried since her father's funeral, and that had been nearly 3 years ago. And even then she had waited until everyone left the reception and she was alone in the hotel room before she let it happen. She wasn't a person who cried in cars. She was a person who made decisions and executed them. What she did was sit with the engine running and both hands on the wheel and look at the street ahead of her. The man had told her to come back in the morning. He hadn't negotiated. He hadn't asked about the money or tried to double it. He had told her she was wrong about something and then apologized on her behalf. Not to be kind, but because it was accurate, which was somehow worse. And then he'd asked about the sabotage like it was the obvious question, the one that mattered, the one she should have led with. She had spent 18 months on this merger. She had worked 16-hour days, flown to Singapore and Frankfurt and Vancouver, read every contract clause under fluorescent hotel lighting, and built something that her father would have been proud of. Something that would carry his name into a future he would never see. And someone inside her company was trying to take it from her. She didn't know who. She had suspicions she couldn't prove and couldn't articulate, not even to herself. Just a pattern of small failures and coincidental leaks and decisions that seemed innocent individually and sinister collectively. The clause in the merger agreement, the timing, the specific wording that seemed to know exactly what to target. She needed someone who could see it clearly, someone who wasn't afraid of her or invested in her or trying to manage her, someone steady. She hadn't expected him to look like that. She hadn't expected the kid on the stool, or the smell of the workshop, or the way he'd told her she was wrong without a second's hesitation. She hadn't expected to feel, for exactly one moment, like someone was actually paying attention. She put the car in drive. He was back in the shop by 7:30 the next morning, which was unusual. Ava's school didn't start until 8:40, and she needed 45 minutes of slow waking before she could function, which meant no sharp sounds before 8. But he was up anyway, turning the cabinet door under the shop light, looking at the grain. His sister called at 7:50. "Marcus Webb called me," she said, instead of hello. "I know. He wanted to know if you were going to do it. He seemed very excited." Marcus doesn't need to be excited. Ethan, his sister, Donna, 35, a nurse, 3 kids, the most practical person he knew, had a specific tone for moments she considered important. She was using it now. Charlotte Vaughn is 27 years old and runs a company worth... I know what she runs. And she came to your workshop. I know that too. I was there. Are you going to do it? He set down the cabinet door. He hadn't slept well. He'd lain in bed looking at the ceiling for 2 hours thinking not about the money. The money was genuinely not what kept him up, but about what Charlotte had said. I can't see clearly anymore. I'm too close to it. He knew that feeling. He had lived in that feeling for 6 months after the marriage ended, and the job ended simultaneously, and everything was fog. The thing that had helped wasn't money or advice or time. It had been someone sitting down across from him, Dana actually, at her kitchen table, and saying, "Tell me what's actually happening." Not to solve it, just to see it. "I don't know," he told his sister. "Well, if you do," she said, "I want to meet her." "Why?" "Because anyone who tracks down a carpenter on Delwood Avenue when they could have hired a professional actor is either smarter than I expect or more desperate than she looks. And either way, that's interesting." He heard Ava's alarm going off upstairs. "I have to make breakfast." "Let me know," Dana said, and hung up. Charlotte arrived at 9:02. She had 2 coffees from the place on Millard. She handed him one without ceremony and stood on the other side of the bench. "I told Ava you were coming," he said. "She already left for school." Charlotte seemed to file this information somewhere. "Okay. What I want to know," he said, "before anything else, is the merger actually at risk? Not legally. Actually." She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. She had changed from last night. Different blazer, same composure, but there was something slightly less armored about her at 9 in the morning. Less performance in it. "If the clause is used to challenge my fitness as a decision maker, Meridian's board has the right under the agreement to pause the process for a 30-day review," she said. "In that 30 days, the investors I've already committed to this deal could legally withdraw. And if they withdraw..." She stopped. "The deal doesn't pause. It collapses. And the company my father spent 20 years building gets absorbed by people who see it as an asset to dismantle." 4,000 jobs, he said, "in this state alone." He nodded. "Who knows you're here?" "My chief of staff. She's the only person at Vaughn Group I still trust completely." "Why her?" "Because she's been with me for 4 years and has never once tried to manage me. She tells me what's true, not what I want to hear." Charlotte looked at him. "Like you did last night." He drank his coffee. "Marcus Webb. He doesn't know the full situation. He was told I was looking for someone reliable for a social engagement." "All right." He set his cup down. "Here's what I need. Before I agree to anything, I want to understand the company structure. Who reports to you directly? Who has access to the merger documentation, and who would benefit most if the deal collapsed? Not from a document, from you, talking. Charlotte blinked. You want a briefing? I want to hear how you talk about the people around you, who you hesitate on, who you don't. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Why does that matter? Because you said you can't see it clearly, but you already know something. You have a feeling about someone specific, and you haven't said the name yet. He looked at her. You're protecting someone. The silence that followed was different from the others. It had weight to it. Charlotte looked down at her coffee. The morning light from the shop window was imperfect, dusty, and real, and in it she looked younger than he'd thought and considerably more worn down than she had in the previous night's control. There was a line between her eyebrows that he suspected was permanent. Daniel Marsh, she said, quietly. My business development director. He's been with the company for 7 years. He was my father's hire. She stopped. I've known him since I was 19. He helped me navigate the transition after my father died. She stopped again. He was the closest thing I had to support inside the company. But the clause language, the specific wording. She looked up. Daniel was one of 4 people who reviewed the preliminary agreement before it went to Meridian. He would have seen the exact gap in the documentation that someone could exploit. He would have known exactly how to frame it in a way that targeted me without appearing targeted. You've been sitting on this. I have no proof. And She exhaled slowly. If I'm wrong, I've destroyed a 7-year relationship and implicated someone who may have genuinely supported me. And if I'm right, I don't understand why. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, People betray you when they believe they have more to gain than they have to lose. Find out what Daniel Marsh stands to gain if the merger collapses, and you'll have your answer. Charlotte looked at him for a long beat. You're sure you're a carpenter? I build things, he said. Building things teaches you a lot about how structures fail. She almost smiled. It wasn't complete. It stopped before it arrived. But it was the closest thing to unguarded he'd seen from her. I'll need you available Thursday morning, she said. There's a dinner Friday with 2 members of Meridian's board. It would be the first public appearance. I have a 4:30 school pickup Thursday. I'll have you back by 4. If you're not, he said, the dinner's off. She nodded. No negotiation, no pushing back on that one. He appreciated it. One more thing, he said. What? Ava is not part of this arrangement. She doesn't need to know the details. She doesn't need to be used as part of the story, and if at any point this starts affecting her in ways I can't control, it's over. He met her eyes. That's not negotiable. Charlotte met his eyes. Understood. A pause. She seems remarkable. She keeps a running list of everything in the house that needs fixing, he said. Charlotte's expression shifted into something he couldn't quite name. Not pity. Pity would have annoyed him. Something more like recognition. My father used to do that, she said. He had a small notebook. He called it the repair log. She said it like she hadn't meant to say it. Like it had just arrived, unbidden, from somewhere she didn't manage. He didn't push it. Thursday, he said. Thursday, she said. She picked up her coffee and walked out of the shop. The black Audi disappeared around the corner. The sawdust settled in the morning light. He stood there for a moment. Then he picked up the orbital sander and went back to work. Quote, the call came Thursday morning at 7:45, which was earlier than expected. He was packing Ava's lunch, turkey, sharp cheddar, the apple crackers she'd put on the list. There's a problem, Charlotte said without preamble. He tucked the phone between his ear and shoulder. Tell me. Daniel Marsh requested an emergency board call for this afternoon. He's citing unresolved questions regarding executive decision-making authority, which is, she stopped. This has never happened in 7 years. He's accelerating. Ethan sliced an apple. He knows something's changing. How would he know? Does he know your chief of staff? A brief silence. They work closely. He doesn't know about me specifically, Ethan said, but he knows you're moving. Someone told him you were making a change, and he's trying to get in front of it. He set the knife down. What time is the board call? 2:00. Don't appear rattled, he said. Take the call, say nothing you're not prepared to defend, and let him show his hand. He's moving early because he's nervous. Nervous people make mistakes. He could hear her breathing. How are you this calm? I'm making a second grader's lunch. It's hard to panic about anything else while you're doing that. He heard Ava's feet on the stairs. I'll be at your office at 1. We can go over the dinner preparation before your call. You don't have to come for the call. I want to see how he behaves when he doesn't know I exist yet. He paused. I'll dress appropriately. No sawdust. A different silence this time. Softer. Thank you, Ethan. Don't thank me yet, he said. I'm still a carpenter. Ava came into the kitchen in her socks, hair a disaster, backpack trailing behind her. She saw the phone at his ear and moved directly to the lunch bag to inspect it. New crackers? She asked. Apple cinnamon, he said. She considered this seriously. Then she gave a short nod, like a judge rendering a verdict, and began her slow preparation for the school day. He hung up the phone. Assam. Vaughn Group occupied the top 4 floors of a building downtown that had been built in the 40s and renovated twice since, the bones of it still visible in the stone facade and the heavy lobby cornices. Ethan stood in front of it at 12:55 in dark trousers and the cleanest shirt he owned, which was a charcoal gray button-down he'd bought for his sister's wedding 3 years ago and had not worn since. He looked at the building for a moment. He was not a man who experienced intimidation as something that happened in the chest. He experienced it as a slowing down, a calculation, a brief and realistic assessment of every way this could go wrong. He ran that assessment now, standing on the sidewalk, and then he walked inside. Charlotte's chief of staff was named Sandra Reyes, 42, dark-eyed, with the energy of someone who had long since decided to find the situation interesting rather than stressful. She met him in the lobby. You're exactly what she described, Sandra said, studying him without apology. What did she describe? Steady, Sandra said. Come on. The board calls in the conference room on 32, but Charlotte wants you in her office first. He followed her to the elevator. The building was quiet in the way that expensive spaces were quiet. Not empty, but controlled. People moved through it purposefully. Charlotte's office occupied a corner of the 34th floor. It was large and mostly clear of personal effects. No photographs on the desk, no mementos on the shelves. There was a large architectural drawing framed on one wall, and when he looked at it, he saw it was a blueprint, a warehouse complex, the Vaughn Group logo in the corner. My father's first major project, Charlotte said from behind him. She had changed into a different blazer, a dark one. She was looking at the blueprint with an expression that was not nostalgia. It was harder than that, more like a vow. He built that with 6 employees and 2 trucks, 1987. You kept the original. He kept it. I kept it after. She turned to him. Daniel will be on the call in an hour. I want to tell you what he looks like when he lies. Ethan turned from the blueprint and gave her his full attention. He goes still, she said. Most people move when they lie, say small gestures, adjustments. Daniel goes completely still. He learned to control the signals years ago, but he can't control the stillness. She paused. My father noticed it first. He told me about it years ago and said, but Daniel is the most competent person in the building and the most careful liar, which means he's only dangerous when he thinks he's losing. Ethan looked at her. Your father knew. My father trusted people anyway, she said. He thought people were worth the risk of trusting, even when they let you down. Something crossed her face that she didn't finish. I used to think that was naive. And now? She looked at him, not with the calculated assessment she'd brought to the workshop 2 nights ago. Something else, something less sure of itself. I don't know what I think now, she said. I haven't in a while. Through the window, the city stretched out below in the October light. The buildings were gold in it, and the streets moved with traffic and pedestrians. And somewhere 3 miles northwest was a workshop on Delwood Avenue and a school where his daughter was currently in reading group. Show me the merger document, he said. Specifically, the clause. She pulled it up on her desk screen and moved aside so he could read it. He read it twice. He was not a lawyer and did not pretend to be, but he was a man who read contracts carefully and understood how language could be precise in ways that weren't obvious until they mattered. The phrase, evidence of personal stability, he said. That's the operative term. Yes. What's the definition of evidence as written? She pointed to a subsection. He read it again. This says documentary or witnessed evidence, he said. An engagement announcement, a public record. Correct. But it doesn't define what constitutes engagement. She looked at him. What do you mean? It says engaged to be married, but it doesn't specify a legal or jurisdictional definition. In most states, an engagement is a private agreement. There's no license, no registration. It's a statement between two people and the acknowledgement of witnesses. Charlotte stared at him. You're saying we don't need paperwork. I'm saying the clause, as written, requires us to behave as if we're engaged in front of witnesses, which is exactly what we're already planning to do. He looked at her. Whoever drafted this was targeting you emotionally, not legally. They expected you to panic about the speed and the requirements and miss that the actual bar is lower than it looks. Charlotte was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, My legal team spent 3 days reviewing this clause. With respect, he said, your legal team was looking for a challenge. I was looking for a solution. She sat down behind her desk. She was doing the calculation he'd seen her do the first night, the rapid internal assessment, the adjustment. Then she said, Ethan, yeah. I need to ask you something before the dinner tomorrow. Okay. Why are you actually doing this? She looked up at him, not confrontational, genuinely asking. And don't say because of the jobs. You didn't know about the jobs when you agreed. You agreed before I told you that number. He thought about it. He thought about the moment in the shop when she'd said, I can't see clearly anymore, and the way it had arrived in him like something familiar, like an echo. Because you came to the right place, he said, and I'm trying to remember what it means to let that matter. She looked at him for a moment. Then she nodded, once, and said, Thank you. Stop thanking me, he said. We have an hour before your board call. She almost smiled. This time it was closer to arriving. All right, she said. Let me tell you about Daniel Marsh. Outside the window, the city moved and glittered, indifferent as always to what was being decided in the rooms above it. Ethan Cross, who built furniture in a garage on Delwood Avenue, pulled a chair to the corner of the desk and listened carefully, and thought about structures, and about how they failed, and about what it took to hold a thing together until you could find the break. He thought he could find it. He was, after all, a man who built things. Daniel Marsh looked exactly the way Charlotte had described him. He was 51, silver at the temples, with the build of a man who had once been athletic and had allowed time to soften the edges without erasing them entirely. He sat at the far end of the conference table with both hands flat on the surface, and when Charlotte walked in with Sandra at her side, his face arranged itself into an expression of mild concern that Ethan, watching from the back corner of the room where Sandra had quietly positioned him, recognized immediately as rehearsed. Ethan had not been introduced. Charlotte had told the room he was her fiancé's representative, there to observe the facilities ahead of a charitable partnership discussion. No one questioned it. In rooms like this, strangers with good posture and ambiguous titles were generally assumed to belong. There were 5 board members on the call screen and 2 in the room. Daniel had called the meeting, which meant he controlled the framing. He began by expressing, with careful generosity, his deep concern for the company's stability during the final critical days before the merger signing. We've had 3 instances of document discrepancy in the Meridian file in the past 2 weeks, he said. Minor on the surface, but in an agreement of this complexity, minor discrepancies compound. He looked at Charlotte. I raised this privately with you last week, Charlotte, and I want the board to understand that I am raising it publicly now only because I feel we owe transparency to— Which discrepancies? Charlotte asked. Daniel paused. I'm sorry? You said 3 instances. Which 3? Give me the document reference numbers. A half-second of stillness. Just that. A half-second in which Daniel Marsh did not move at all, his hands flat on the table, his expression unchanged, exactly as she'd described. Then he reached for the folder in front of him and said smoothly, I'll have those pulled up in a moment. You called this meeting based on those discrepancies, Charlotte said. You should have them ready. One of the board members on screen, a woman named Patricia, whom Charlotte had described as an ally, leaned slightly forward. Charlotte is right, Daniel. If this is the basis for the concern, we should see the documentation. Daniel found the references. He read them out. 2 were formatting inconsistencies in the appendices, the kind that happen in any large document after multiple revision passes. The 3rd was a date error, a signing date that had been typed as a year off, that Charlotte's legal team had already corrected and distributed 3 days ago. That correction was circulated on Monday, Charlotte said quietly. It's in everyone's inbox. The stillness again, briefer this time. The meeting continued for another 40 minutes, and by the end of it, the emergency had been quietly reclassified as a precautionary check-in. Daniel thanked everyone for their time with the ease of a man who had been doing this for 25 years, and the screens went dark one by one. Ethan walked out into the hallway and waited. Charlotte came out 3 minutes later. Sandra was behind her, and Daniel was behind Sandra, already in conversation with one of the in-room board members about the flight logistics for the signing ceremony. He had not looked at Ethan once during the meeting. Charlotte fell into step beside Ethan without a word, and they walked to the elevator, and it wasn't until the doors closed that she said, "He didn't have the references ready." "No," Ethan said. "He called an emergency board meeting without having the references ready." "Which means the meeting wasn't about the discrepancies." "No. The meeting was to establish a pattern with the board. Small seeds. I've raised this privately. I'm now raising it publicly." He's building a record. Ethan watched the floor numbers descend. He wants the board to associate Charlotte Vaughn with instability before the signing. Even if the merger succeeds, he's positioning. Positioning for what? For whatever comes after, Ethan said. What happens to Vaughn Group's leadership structure post-merger? Charlotte was quiet for a moment. Then, the combined entity would require a restructured executive team. I've been designated as CEO of the merged company, but the Meridian board has the right to propose a co-CEO structure if they identify operational risk factors in the transition. And if there's a co-CEO, Meridian's proposal already names their candidate, she said. David Hale. He's been at Meridian for 9 years. He and Daniel have known each other for 15. She stopped. They went to school together. The elevator reached the lobby. The doors opened on the stone and marble of the ground floor, the afternoon light through the tall front windows. Ethan stepped out and turned to face her. Daniel Marsh isn't trying to kill the merger, he said. He's trying to reshape what's on the other side of it. If the clause creates enough instability to trigger a review, the 30-day pause opens the door to renegotiation. New terms. Co-CEO provision becomes permanent instead of optional. And if David Hale is running operations, Daniel controls Hale, Charlotte said. He always has. Her voice was flat. Not with shock, with the particular flatness of a person watching a thing they suspected become a thing they know. He's been planning this since before the merger was even close to signing. Probably since before you were CEO, Ethan said. She looked at him. He didn't soften it for her. Your father trusted him, he said, and your father was right that he was competent. But competent people have ambitions, and ambitions that go unmet long enough become something else. Charlotte was quiet for a long time. Around them, the lobby moved, staff coming and going, the soft sounds of a building in use. Outside, the city. Inside, the particular silence of 2 people who had just shifted from suspicion to something they would now have to act on. What do I do? She said, not like someone accustomed to asking that question. You don't do anything different yet, he said. You go to the dinner tomorrow and you let me watch the room. And you find out what Daniel is telling people about me. About you? He'll be curious now. You walked out of that meeting with a man no one recognized. He'll ask around. Ethan paused. What he does with the information tells you how careful he's being. Charlotte studied him. You're using yourself as a test. I'm already a variable in the equation, he said. Might as well be a useful one. Something moved in her face. Not quite admiration, more like the recalibration of an expectation. She had come to a workshop on Delwood Avenue looking for a prop. She was beginning to understand she hadn't found one. 4:30, she said, Ava's pickup. Right. Go, she said. I'll have the dinner details sent to your phone. He nodded and walked toward the front doors, and she watched him go. Son. He was 3 minutes early to the school, which meant he was there when Ava came out with her class and spotted him before he spotted her. She had her mother's gift for locating people in crowds, which he tried not to think about too often. She was halfway to him before the line had fully dispersed, backpack bouncing. "You're wearing a different shirt," she said. "I had a meeting." She looked at the shirt with the evaluation she brought to most things. "It's a good color on you." "Thank you, Bug." "Did you help the lady with the tired voice?" He started walking. She fell into step. "Working on it." "Is it hard?" "Some parts." Ava was quiet for half a block. Then she said, "Mia's mom came to career day and talked about being a nurse, and Mia cried because she was proud. Do you think you could come to career day?" "When is it?" "November 9th. "I'll be there." "You could bring a piece of wood," she said, "and tools. Everyone else just talks. You could actually build something." He looked down at her. She was watching the sidewalk, stepping carefully over the cracks with the particular attention she gave to small physical rules she'd invented for herself. "That's a good idea," he said. She nodded, satisfied. "I thought so." The restaurant Charlotte had chosen for the Meridian dinner was the kind of place that didn't have its name on the exterior. You either knew where it was or you didn't. Ethan arrived with Charlotte at 7:45. He'd met her in the lobby of her building, and she had looked at his jacket and said nothing, which he took as approval. And the two Meridian board members were already at the table. Martin Foss was 63, a Canadian with a civil engineer's background who had built Meridian's infrastructure division from scratch in the 90s. He had the easy confidence of someone who had spent decades solving real problems and had no patience for people who hadn't. His wife was not with him. He extended a hand to Ethan and shook it the way people shook hands when they were actually paying attention. Grace Lim was 58, a former trade lawyer who had joined Meridian's board 4 years ago. She was the sharper of the two, quieter, and she watched Ethan with the neutrality of someone reserving judgment. "Charlotte tells us you're in custom furniture," Martin said after they'd ordered. "Residential and commercial," Ethan said. "High-end custom, some restoration work." "How'd you two meet?" Grace asked. She asked it conversationally, but it was not a conversational question. It was the first real test of the evening, delivered in the second glass of wine. Charlotte answered before Ethan could, which they had not planned. "He was doing a restoration project on a building I was considering acquiring. I walked through the site, and he was the only person in the room who told me the building had a structural problem that the contractor was covering." She looked at Ethan with the specific expression of a woman looking at someone she'd chosen. It was unsettling in its accuracy. "I've never been good at ignoring people who tell me the truth." Martin laughed. Grace's expression softened slightly. "And you didn't mind that—" Martin gestured vaguely. "The difference in worlds?" "What difference?" Ethan said. Martin looked at him. "I build things that last," Ethan said. "Charlotte builds companies that last. That's not a difference in worlds. That's the same instinct in different forms." A short silence. Then Martin picked up his wine glass and said, "I like him," to Charlotte, the way people said things when they meant them. Across the table, Grace Lim was watching Ethan with an expression that had shifted from neutral to something more specific. Not suspicion. Interest. "You have a daughter," she said. He hadn't told her that. He looked at Charlotte, who gave the smallest shake of her head. She hadn't either, which meant Grace Lim had done her homework. 8 years old, he said. 3rd grade. Single father? 4 years. Grace nodded and something settled in her face. "My brother raised his two alone after his wife passed," she said. "He's the most organized person I know, and also the most stubborn." She looked at Ethan. "There's a specific kind of person that makes." "What kind?" Ethan asked. "The kind who's thought carefully about what actually matters," she said, "and doesn't have much patience for things that don't." He held her gaze. "That's about right." The evening moved forward. Conversation ranged through the merger timeline, through the infrastructure challenges of the combined entity's European operations, through a long tangent about a construction delay in Frankfurt that Martin had navigated with what Ethan recognized as genuine engineering problem-solving. He listened more than he spoke. He watched Charlotte, the way she translated her technical knowledge into language that was clear without being simplified, The way she handled Martin's skeptical questions without becoming defensive. The way she carried the evening. She was, he was realizing, exceptionally good at this. Not in the way he'd expected. Not polished in a way that felt performed, but precise in a way that felt genuine. She knew things deeply. She had read everything. She had thought about the problems from angles that weren't obvious. And when Martin pushed her, she pushed back with data and with the quiet confidence of someone who has done the preparation. He had thought of her, when she walked into his shop, as someone operating in a register entirely foreign to his own. He was revising that. She wasn't foreign. She was in the ways that mattered, someone he recognized. After the dinner, after Martin had insisted on a second dessert course and Grace had asked Ethan a quiet question about restoration work on historical buildings that turned into a 20-minute conversation, they stood outside on the sidewalk in the October cold while Martin's car arrived. Martin shook Charlotte's hand first, then Ethan's, longer this time. "I had concerns coming into tonight," he said, "about a lot of things. I want you to know they're considerably smaller now." Charlotte said, "Thank you, Martin." Martin looked at Ethan. "Take care of her." It was an old-fashioned thing to say. Ethan didn't react to the old-fashioned part. He just said, "I intend to," and meant it as a fact rather than a promise. Grace said goodnight more quietly. She touched Charlotte's arm briefly, the gesture of a woman who didn't touch people casually, and then she looked at Ethan and said, "You're good for her." The car arrived, and they were gone. Charlotte and Ethan stood on the sidewalk. The street was quiet, the kind of autumn quiet that only existed between 10 and 11 at night. She had her arms crossed against the cold, not with anxiety, just with the physical reality of a night in October without a coat warm enough for standing still. "You didn't tell them about Ava ahead of time," he said. "No, I thought it would look like I was using her." She paused. "Was that wrong?" "No," he said. "It was right." She looked at him sideways. "Grace liked you." "Grace is smart. She likes people who mean what they say." "Martin liked you because you said I wasn't from a different world than you." She was quiet for a moment. "Did you mean that?" He thought about it. The honest answer. "I meant that the thing that makes you good at your work isn't different from the thing that makes anyone good at careful work. You pay attention. You prepare. You'd rather be accurate than comfortable." Charlotte looked at the street. "My father used to say I was too much like him," she said. "He meant it as a warning." She stopped. He spent his whole life building the company, and then one day he looked up and realized he'd missed almost everything else, and it was too late to go back and have the rest of it. She said it matter-of-factly, the way people said true painful things when they'd had enough time to make them manageable. He was 58. He died at 61. Ethan didn't say he was sorry. She'd heard that enough. "What did he miss?" he asked. She looked at him. "Me, mostly. The everyday version. He had the big moments, graduations, achievements. He was there for those. But the—" She stopped. "The Tuesday evenings, the regular dinners, he missed those." She exhaled, a small cloud in the cold air. "I used to be angry about it. Then I ran a company, and I understood exactly how it happened, and then I was angry at myself for understanding." He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he said, "Ava has a running list of things that need fixing around the house. She's had it since she was 7. Charlotte looked at him. "She doesn't keep it because I'm not doing my job," he said. "She keeps it because she pays attention, because she wants things to work. She's going to be terrifying when she grows up." He paused. "The regular Tuesday evenings are why. Not the big moments. The regular stuff is where you find out who someone actually is." Charlotte was quiet for a long time. The street around them was almost empty now. "I'd like to meet her," she said. It came out smaller than her usual register, less executive. He looked at her. "She's 8 years old and she'll ask you 17 questions about your company and then ask whether you've read the whole Percy Jackson series." "I have," Charlotte said. "All 5 original books and the follow-on series." He blinked. "When did you have time?" 14. I read them at 14. She looked at him. "I still have them." He was quiet for a moment. "Saturday morning," he said. "We make pancakes on Saturday mornings. It's not formal. It's not—" "I understand what Saturday morning pancakes are," she said. "I know you do," he said. I just want to make sure you know this isn't a strategy. If you come, it's because you want to. She looked at him for a long moment. The wind moved between the buildings. Somewhere down the block, the cab door closed. I know, she said. She arrived Saturday at 9:15 with orange juice, which she had picked up from a place near her building because she hadn't known what to bring. And orange juice had seemed like a reasonable anchor. She stood at the side door of the workshop, which was the door that connected to the kitchen, the one Ava used after school, and knocked. Ava opened it. They looked at each other. Charlotte, in her off-duty version, dark jeans, a gray pullover, hair loose for the first time he'd seen, and Ava in pajama pants with small foxes printed on them, and a shirt that said "Reading is my superpower," which was a gift from his sister. You have the tired voice, Ava said. Charlotte said, "Excuse me?" From the phone. When you called my dad the first time, I was in the shop. Ava tilted her head. It's better now. Charlotte stood there for a moment. Ethan was at the stove and couldn't see her face from where he stood, but he heard the pause and he knew what it meant. A little better, Charlotte said. Ava stepped back and held the door open. Come in. He makes the good kind with the blueberries. Charlotte came in. She sat at the kitchen table, the one he'd built himself 4 years ago, the first piece he'd made after converting the garage, the one with the slightly uneven back left leg that he'd never fix because it was the leg Ava always propped her foot against when she read at dinner. Charlotte set the orange juice on the table and looked around the kitchen, the drawings on the fridge, the chore chart, the row of library books on the counter, the slight chaos of a home lived in by two imperfect people doing their best. The gutter over the window is pulling away from the fascia, Ava said, climbing onto her chair. Charlotte looked up at the window, then at Ethan, then back at Ava. Has he fixed it? Not yet. It's on the list. Ethan set a plate of pancakes on the table. I'll fix it before the rain. That's what you said last time, Ava said, pleasantly, without accusation. She reached for the maple syrup with the confidence of a person who knew where things lived. Charlotte looked at the plate of pancakes. Then she looked at Ethan, and he saw something cross her face that was not analyzable, was not part of any calculation. Just something that arrived in her and stayed there, quiet and unresolved, like a question she wasn't ready to ask yet. She picked up a fork. Ava was already eating, one hand on her fork, the other reaching for the orange juice Charlotte had brought, and she poured herself a glass with the comfort of a child in a space she owned. And then she poured one for Charlotte without being asked, because that was what Ava did. She took care of the table. Charlotte watched her do it, and did not say anything, and did not have to. Outside, the October morning pressed against the kitchen windows. The gutter held. The pancakes were warm. Ava said, Do you know Percy Jackson? And the morning became what mornings were, which was ordinary and irreplaceable, and none of them recognized it yet for what it was. The pancake Saturdays became a thing without anyone deciding they would. The first one had been an experiment, Charlotte with her orange juice and her off-duty jeans, Ava with her Percy Jackson questions and her unself-conscious way of pouring a glass for someone she'd just met. The second Saturday happened because Ava had asked, on Wednesday evening while Ethan was making dinner, Is Charlotte coming this weekend? In the tone of someone confirming a calendar item, and Ethan had said he didn't know, and Ava had said, You should find out, and gone back to her book. He had texted Charlotte. She had replied within 4 minutes. The third Saturday, she brought a book, not a gift. She hadn't wrapped it or made a presentation of it. She had simply set it on the table when she arrived, a paperback copy of The Lightning Thief that was visibly not new, the spine cracked, and the back cover soft with use. I found mine, she said to Ava, who picked it up and turned it over and examined the condition the way a serious reader examined books, which was with respect for the wear. You read this a lot, Ava said. 3 times, Charlotte said. Maybe 4. Ava looked at her with an expression that recalibrated something. After that, they were something, not defined, not labeled, but something. And Ethan watched it develop the way he watched good wood reveal its grain, slowly, under pressure, more beautiful than the surface had suggested. Meanwhile, the merger was 9 days from signing. The scandal was building in the background like weather on a clear day, and Daniel Marsh was moving faster than any of them had expected. The first sign came on a Monday. Sandra called at 7 in the morning. Not Charlotte, Sandra. Which meant Charlotte was already in a situation she couldn't step away from to make the call herself. There's a story going up this afternoon, Sandra said. Financial press. Someone gave them photographs and background documentation. They're framing Ethan as a paid actor brought in to satisfy the merger clause. Ethan was in the shop, fitting a drawer slide. He set down the jig. What documentation? Copies of a payment record. Modified, obviously. The amounts and descriptions have been altered, but they look real enough for a news cycle. Sandra's voice was controlled but tight. Charlotte is on a call with legal right now. She wanted me to reach you first. Who's the reporter? James Kowal. He covers corporate restructuring for the Financial Register. He's not a tabloid, Ethan. He's credible, which makes this worse. He absorbed this. Outside the shop window, a neighbor was walking a dog in the gray morning. The world was continuing at its regular pace, indifferent to the fact that someone had constructed a lie carefully enough to look like evidence. When does it post? He said. 4 o'clock. Can Charlotte get a comment on record before then? She's trying to, but the documentation looks... Sandra stopped. It looks specific enough that a denial without counter-evidence just reads as confirmation. Then we need counter-evidence, he said. What counter-evidence? We can't prove a negative. We don't need to prove the negative, he said. We need to prove where the documents actually came from. The modified records had to start somewhere. Real financial documentation, even altered, carries metadata, timestamps, system signatures. Whoever modified them either scrubbed the metadata or didn't think about it. He paused. I need the documents themselves. Can Charlotte get them from the reporter as part of a right-to-respond process? A brief silence. Legally, yes. If she responds formally, Kowal is required to provide the documentation he's basing the story on. Then she responds formally, Ethan said. Right now, before noon. He hung up and stood in the shop for a moment, looking at the half-fitted drawer. Then he looked at the ceiling, which needed nothing. He was thinking about Daniel Marsh sitting somewhere in a downtown office with both hands flat on a surface, completely still, watching a clock. He called his sister. I need a favor, he said when Dana picked up. This is about the CEO. Yes. Okay, she said without hesitation, which was why Dana was Dana. What do you need? Someone who knows financial document forensics. Not a lawyer. Someone technical. My hospital uses a forensic accounting firm for billing audits. The guy they use is named Theo Park. He's thorough and he's fast and he owes me a favor from a thing I'm not going to explain. She paused. How fast do you need this? Before 4 o'clock today. A short silence. I'll call him now. Charlotte arrived at the workshop at 11:30 with Sandra and a printed copy of the documents Kowal had provided. She looked like she hadn't slept well, which she hadn't. Ethan could tell not from her appearance, but from the way she was holding her coffee. With both hands, the way people held something warm when they needed the warmth more than the caffeine. She set the documents on his workbench. He looked at them. They were good. He had to give Daniel that. The fabrication was careful. A payment record from a financial management account, 6 weeks old, with Ethan's name in the recipient field and a description that read Engagement Services, Vaughn Account. The dollar amount was $180,000, which was close enough to the real number she'd offered him initially to be plausible and far enough away to be unprovable by comparison. Theo Park is coming at 1, Ethan said. Dana's forensic accountant. He'll look at the digital originals. Charlotte looked at him. You called your sister. She knows people I don't. Something moved in Charlotte's face. Not surprise exactly, but the continuous recalibration she'd been doing since the first night she walked into this shop. Every time she expected him to operate within a specific radius, he turned out to have a wider one. The story isn't just about the payment, she said. She sat down on the shop stool, Ava's stool, the reading throne, and set her coffee on the bench. There are quotes. Anonymous sources described as close to Vaughn Group leadership. They describe Ethan as a working-class hire designed to appear authentic to merger partners. They say I researched and selected him for his background. She stopped. It's framed to make the authenticity itself look calculated. The fact that he's real makes the deception look more sophisticated, not less. Sandra said from near the door, "It's a good hit piece. Whoever constructed it understood optics." "Daniel understood optics," Charlotte said, flatly. "He's been managing them for 25 years. Ethan was looking at the documents. "Has he ever seen the inside of this shop?" "No." "Has he met Ava?" "No." "Has he heard you talk about her?" Charlotte paused. "I mentioned her once, in a staff meeting, a few weeks ago." She looked at him. "Why?" "Because the framing is about you selecting someone useful. The carpenter, the single father, the authentic working class presentation. It's a good frame because it's partially true. You did select me, and you did consider my background." He set the document down. "But the frame breaks on one point. You can select a type. You can't manufacture the relationship between a grown woman and an 8-year-old kid. Those aren't scriptable." Charlotte was quiet. "Ava's teacher," he said. "The school events you've come to, the Saturday mornings. Sandra has seen all of it." He looked at Sandra. "You have." Sandra met his eyes. "Every bit of it. Authentic relationships leave a different kind of record than professional ones," he said. "Text messages about what snacks to bring, school event RSVPs, Ava's drawings." He looked at Charlotte. "She drew you one." Charlotte looked down at her coffee. "I know," she said quietly. "I'd like to use it," he said. "Not as a stunt, as part of the counter record. A child doesn't draw someone she met twice." A silence filled the shop. The morning light was gray through the windows, imperfect, the way it always was. "Ethan," Charlotte said. "Yeah. I need to tell you something before this goes any further." She set the coffee down. She wasn't looking at the document anymore. She was looking at the bench, at the grain of the wood, the way people looked at surfaces when they were working up to something true. "When the merger signs, when this is over, you should know that I've been thinking about what comes after." He waited. "The arrangement ends," she said. "That was always the structure. 6 weeks, the merger signs. We announce a mutual and amicable separation after a reasonable period, and you go back to your life, and I go back to mine." She looked up. "I want you to know that I know that. I haven't forgotten what this is." He looked at her for a moment. "Have I said anything that suggested I thought you had?" "No," she said. "But I've been—" She stopped. She was not, he had noticed, a person who stumbled over words. She assembled sentences the way she assembled arguments, precisely, with purpose. When she stopped mid-sentence, it meant something. "You've been thinking about Saturday mornings," he said. She looked at him. "Not strategically," he said, "just thinking about them." She didn't answer, which was in its way an answer. He picked up the documents. "Let's deal with today," he said. "The rest of it can wait." Bashim. Theo Park was 40, compact, precise. With reading glasses, he kept pushing up his nose and the mild demeanor of someone who found genuine pleasure in finding things other people had hidden. He spread the digital files across his laptop at the workbench and worked through them for 45 minutes while Charlotte and Sandra sat in the kitchen and Ethan watched from the doorway, not speaking, letting the man concentrate. At 2:15, Theo pushed his glasses up and said, "Okay." Ethan came back into the shop. Charlotte came in from the kitchen. "The document was created 19 days ago," Theo said. The metadata on the original financial management template, which came from a real Vaughn Group system, by the way, someone had internal access, shows a creation timestamp of October 14th at 11:47 p.m. The modification timestamp is October 14th at 11:52. 5 minutes between creation and modification. He looked up. "Real financial records don't work that way. You don't generate a payment record and then modify it 5 minutes later at midnight. This was assembled from a template and edited in a single session." "Can you prove the original template was unmodified?" Charlotte asked. "Better than that," Theo said. "The template file, I can see the system it originated from. It's from your AP management software, which generates automated timestamps embedded in the document structure. The embedded timestamp says this template was last legitimately used on September 29th for a routine vendor payment. The metadata on the fake document copies the template header, but the embedded timestamp is September 29th. He looked at Charlotte over his glasses. Whoever built this fake copied the wrong timestamp. The fake document is dated October 14th, but the embedded system stamp says September 29th. Those can't both be true. The shop was very quiet. That's provable, Ethan said. It's demonstrable to anyone with basic document forensics knowledge, Theo said. It's not sophisticated. It's actually kind of sloppy for someone who knew what they were doing with everything else. Charlotte said, "He was in a hurry." Everyone looked at her. "Daniel is meticulous when he has time," she said. "He's been planning this for months, maybe longer. But the dinner with Martin and Grace, when Ethan handled that well, when the merger looked like it was going to hold, he accelerated. He didn't have time to be careful." Ethan nodded. "He made a mistake." "He made a mistake," she said, and the way she said it was not triumphant. It was tired and sad and 7 years long. She sent the forensic analysis to Kowal at 3:25, 35 minutes before his deadline, with a formal statement and a legal notice. Kowal killed the story at 3:50. It never posted. The shareholder meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday, 4 days before the signing, and Daniel Marsh knew the forensic analysis existed by Wednesday morning. Ethan didn't know how he knew. Either someone in Charlotte's circle had talked, or Daniel had monitoring in place that Ethan hadn't accounted for. It didn't matter. What mattered was that by Wednesday afternoon, Daniel had shifted tactics. He stopped working through the media. He went directly to the board. Charlotte was in back-to-back calls when Sandra knocked on her office door at 4:15 and handed her a printed email without a word. Ethan was there. He'd been in the building most of the day, working at a corner table in Sandra's outer office with his laptop, reviewing shipping logistics documentation that Charlotte had asked him to read because, as she'd said, "You see structure problems I can't see anymore." And she had been right. He'd found two. He watched Charlotte read the email. He watched the color leave her face and come back. "What is it?" he said. She handed it to him. Daniel had sent a formal communication to 3 board members, copied to Meridian's external legal counsel, requesting that the Thursday shareholder meeting include a no-confidence motion regarding Charlotte's fitness to lead the merged entity. The grounds cited were the paid engagement arrangement with Ethan, which Daniel characterized as fraud against merger partners, Charlotte's decision to withhold information from the board during the acquisition process, and a general pattern of executive behavior that Daniel described as inconsistent with the stability requirements of international leadership. He had attached supporting materials. Among them was a summary memo that laid out point by point a version of the past 6 weeks that was recognizable as fact but arranged like fiction. Every true thing reframed to look like calculation. Every genuine moment recast as strategy. Ethan read it twice. Then he set it down. "He's going to present this at the shareholder meeting," Charlotte said, "in front of the full board and Meridian's representatives." "Yes." "If he presents it, and I deny it without supporting evidence, it looks defensive. If the board votes on a no-confidence motion with Meridian in the room..." She stopped. "The signing is in 4 days." "I know." "Ethan." She was looking at him across the desk in the late afternoon light, and she looked for the first time in all the weeks he'd known her, genuinely uncertain. Not strategically uncertain. Actually uncertain. "I need to be honest with you. The document he's built, it's not just about the company. It names you specifically. He describes you as a participant in a deliberate deception for financial gain. If this goes public, I know what it says. Your business," she said, "your reputation, Marcus Webb, your clients. If this becomes associated with your name..." "Charlotte." She stopped. "I know what he put in the document," Ethan said. "I read it. And I want you to listen to me for a second." He leaned forward. "I came into this because you had a problem that needed someone steady. I'm still steady. Whatever happens Thursday, I'm not running from it." Her jaw tightened. Not with hardness, with the effort of holding something together. "You have a daughter," she said. "I know I have a daughter. Ava is not afraid of the truth, and neither am I." He met her eyes. "Is there real evidence? Not forensic analysis, evidence that shows what the actual relationship between you and Daniel is and what he stood to gain?" Charlotte was quiet for a moment. Then she looked at Sandra, who was standing near the door. Sandra said, "There are the emails." Charlotte closed her eyes briefly, then opened them. "What emails?" Ethan said. Charlotte said, "3 weeks before the merger clause appeared in the Meridian Agreement, Daniel sent me a series of emails proposing that I step back from day-to-day operations and take a visionary CEO role. He proposed restructuring the executive team to give operational control to a committee he would chair." She paused. "I declined. I told him I appreciated the thought and wasn't interested." "You kept the emails." "Sandra keeps everything." Sandra said, "Every email, every memo, every calendar entry for 7 years. It's a habit." She paused. "It's a very useful habit." Ethan thought about it. The emails established intent, established that Daniel had proposed a power restructure, been refused, and then 3 weeks later, a clause appeared in the merger agreement that would trigger exactly the instability he proposed to manage. It wasn't a confession, but it was a timeline. "There's more," Charlotte said. She reached into a folder on her desk. She had been sitting on this, he realized, for days, maybe longer, letting it sit with the weight of 7 years, because acting on it meant accepting something she hadn't wanted to accept. David Hale at Meridian, the co-CEO candidate. I had someone do a quiet background review this week. Hale and Daniel have a consulting arrangement, an LLC registered 2 years ago. They've been co-invested in a series of infrastructure assets that would become significantly more valuable under the merged company's control if Hale were in an operational role. The office was very quiet. "He's not just moving for power," Ethan said. "He's moving for money." "Several $1,000,000 worth," Charlotte said, conservatively. "And you've had this for how long?" She looked at him directly. 4 days. "Why didn't you—" "Because he was there when my father died," she said. "It came out plainly, without performance, the way things came out when they had been sitting in someone for too long. He sat with me in the hospital. He handled the transition when I was barely holding myself together. And I have been—" She stopped. "I have been trying to find another explanation for 4 days." He didn't say anything for a moment. He understood the 4 days. He had spent his own version of 4 days once trying to find another explanation for something that had only one. "There isn't another explanation," he said. "I know," she said. "Charlotte." He waited until she looked at him. "He's going to stand in front of your board and Meridian's people on Thursday, and he's going to try to take what your father built. And you have the evidence to stop him." He paused. "I know what it costs, but you already know what you're going to do." She was quiet for a long moment. Outside the window, the city was going orange with evening. The building hummed around them with the controlled energy of 1,000 decisions being made. "I need to call Patricia," she said finally. Patricia, the board member he'd seen lean forward during Daniel's first meeting, the one who asked the right questions. "She needs to know before Thursday so she's not blindsided." "Tonight," he said. "Tonight." Charlotte looked at Sandra. "Get me the LLC documentation, the email chain, and Theo Park's forensic report in a single brief, clean and indexed." Sandra was already moving. Charlotte looked at Ethan. There was something in her face that had been building for weeks, some combination of gratitude and something that didn't have gratitude's clean edges, something more complicated, more personal, more frightening. "You should go home," she said. Ava's at Dana's tonight. School field trip prep, they're doing something with poster boards." He stood up. "I'll stay until the brief is done." She looked like she was going to argue. Then she didn't. "Ethan," she said quietly. "Yeah." "After Thursday." She said it like she was testing the words. "After the signing, I want to talk about—" She stopped. "I want to have a conversation that isn't about the merger." He looked at her for a moment. The evening light was on her face, imperfect and real, and she looked nothing like the woman who had walked into his shop with a leather folder and a rehearsed composure. She looked like someone standing at the edge of something and not yet sure if it was a drop or a beginning. "Yeah," he said. "We'll do that." Sandra came back with the laptop and a fresh legal pad, and they sat down, and the work continued, and outside the window the city went from orange to dark, and the building slowly emptied floor by floor until only a few lights remained, including the ones on the 34th floor where a CEO and a carpenter were building the case that would determine what happened to everything she'd spent her life protecting. He drove home at 11:30. The workshop was dark, the house quiet, the kitchen table with its slightly uneven back left leg sitting in the streetlight that came through the window. He sat down at it. He put both hands flat on the surface the way Daniel Marsh put his hands flat when he was going still, and he thought about Thursday, and about what came after Thursday, and about what it meant to build something that was supposed to be temporary and find out, somewhere in the middle of it, that you'd built it to last. The gutter over the kitchen window had been fixed last week. He'd done it on a Saturday afternoon while Charlotte and Ava were inside doing something with poster paints for a school project, and when he'd climbed down the ladder, Ava had come out to inspect and said, "It's good, but the left side is still slightly lower." And she had been right, and he had fixed the left side, and when he came back inside, there was paint on the kitchen table, and Charlotte was trying to clean it with a paper towel, and not making much progress, and Ava was laughing at something. Not at Charlotte, just at the situation, the comfortable, helpless laugh of a kid who knew she was home. He sat at the table for a long time that night. Then he went to bed and slept, and in the morning there was work to do. Thursday arrived the way difficult days always did, quietly, without announcement, the morning looking like any other morning until you remembered what was in it. Ethan was up at 6. He made coffee and stood at the kitchen window and looked at the gutter he'd fixed, the left side sitting level now, the way it was supposed to. Ava came downstairs at 6:40 in her school clothes, which meant she'd been awake for a while. She only dressed herself early when something was on her mind. She sat at the table and poured cereal and said, "Is today the important meeting?" He looked at her. "What do you know about a meeting? You've been on your phone more than usual, and Charlotte texted you last night at 11:30 and you were still awake." She ate a spoonful of cereal. "I wasn't spying, I heard your phone." He sat down across from her. "Yeah, today's the meeting." "Is Charlotte going to be okay?" He thought about the honest answer. Ava was 8, but she was not a child who benefited from being managed. She read the room the same way she read everything, carefully, completely, with retention. "She's going to be okay," he said. "It's going to be hard first, then okay." Ava considered this. "Are you going to be there?" "Yes." She nodded, satisfied, and went back to her cereal. Then, without looking up, "She came to my book report presentation last week." "I know. I was there." "You were in the back," Ava said. She sat in the front. She asked Ms. Peterson a question about the reading assessment levels afterward. A pause. "Ms. Peterson really liked her." Ethan wrapped his hands around his coffee. "Yeah?" "She asked Charlotte if she was a teacher. Charlotte said no, she runs a company." Ms. Peterson said, "You ask questions like a teacher." Charlotte looked. Ava stopped, searching for the word with the precision she applied to most things. She looked like she didn't know what to do with that, like it was a nice thing and she hadn't expected a nice thing. He was quiet for a moment. "Eat your cereal," he said. "You'll be late." Talk. The shareholder meeting was scheduled for 10 o'clock in the building's largest conference room, which occupied half of the 32nd floor and had floor-to-ceiling windows on 2 sides. By 9:45, every seat was filled. Board members, Meridian representatives, legal counsel from both sides, 2 observers from an infrastructure investment group that had committed capital to the merger. Patricia Okafor, the board member Charlotte trusted, the one who'd been quietly briefed 2 nights ago, sat near the center of the table with the stillness of someone who had made a decision and was waiting for the right moment to act on it. Daniel Marsh arrived at 9:52. He was in his best suit, charcoal, well-fitted, the suit of a man who had planned this day carefully. He greeted people by name as he moved around the table, warm and precise, the social ease of someone who had spent decades cultivating rooms like this one. When he saw Ethan standing near the back wall with Sandra, he registered it, a fractional pause, barely visible, and then he continued to his seat without acknowledgement. Charlotte entered at 9:58. She was wearing the dark blazer she'd worn the first night he met her at the restaurant with Martin and Grace. He noticed that, and then noticed he'd noticed it, and filed it away. She moved to her position at the head of the table with the composure of someone who had been preparing for this room since she was 19 years old, watching her father run it. The meeting opened with standard procedural items: merger timeline confirmation, final documentation status, legal counsel from both sides providing brief updates. Ethan stood at the back and watched the room, the way he'd been watching rooms for the past 3 weeks. Not for the things people said, but for the spaces between what they said. Daniel was good. He was exceptionally good. He participated in the early agenda items with the appropriate level of engagement, asked one clarifying question about the transition timeline that sounded genuinely constructive, and built no visible momentum toward what was coming. Anyone who didn't know would have read him as a senior executive doing his job. At 10:38, he asked for the floor. The room settled. "I want to raise something," Daniel said, "that I've been wrestling with bringing to this table. I do so now because I believe this group deserves full transparency before we proceed to the signing, and because I believe withholding it would be a failure of my responsibility to this board and to our partners at Meridian." He paused, and in the pause there was the particular weight of a man performing reluctance with great skill. There are serious questions about the authenticity of Charlotte's personal situation as presented to Meridian's board in the context of the stability clause. A shift in the room, small but real. The kind that happened when a thing people had been quietly hearing rumors about was finally said out loud. Daniel laid it out. He was measured, organized, and thorough. He presented the payment documentation, not the forensically disproven version Ethan noticed, but a second iteration cleaner, the metadata issue corrected. He'd had time to fix the first mistake. He presented the anonymous source characterizations from the attempted press story, now reframed as internal corroboration. He described Ethan as a selected participant in a calculated deception chosen for his demographic authenticity. He spoke for 11 minutes without raising his voice once. When he finished, the room was quiet, in the way rooms were quiet when something had landed. Martin Foss, across the table, was looking at Charlotte, not with accusation. Martin wasn't that kind of man, but with the particular expression of someone who had invested trust and was now measuring its weight against what he'd just heard. Charlotte said, "Are you finished, Daniel?" Her voice was completely level. "I want to give you every opportunity to respond," he said. "I know you do," she said, and in those 4 words was 7 years of knowing exactly who he was, and the specific exhaustion of having finally stopped explaining it to herself. She looked at Patricia. Patricia gave a small nod. Charlotte opened the folder in front of her. Ethan had seen it assembled the night before. Sandra's work, indexed and clean, 4 sections with tab dividers. She set the first document on the table, and Sandra, moving from the back of the room, distributed copies to each seat with the efficiency of someone who had been waiting for this cue. "What you're looking at," Charlotte said, "is a forensic analysis of the payment documentation Daniel presented, prepared by an independent forensic accounting specialist. It demonstrates that the document was created from a Vaughan Group system template and modified within a 5-minute window at 11:47 p.m. on October 14th. The embedded system timestamp is September 29th, inconsistent with the document date by 16 days. The document is fabricated." Daniel's hands were flat on the table, still. Charlotte turned to the second section. "These are emails between Daniel and myself from 3 weeks prior to the appearance of the stability clause in Meridian's agreement. In them, Daniel proposes a restructuring of executive authority that would remove me from operational control. I declined. 22 days later, a clause appeared in the Meridian agreement that, if triggered, would open the door to exactly the restructuring I refused. The room was different now. The shift that had happened when Daniel spoke was reversing. She could feel it, and Ethan, watching from the back, could see it in the way people were sitting. Martin Foss had straightened. Grace Lim, who was on the screen from Singapore, was leaning forward. Charlotte turned to the third section. "This is a corporate registry filing for an LLC registered 26 months ago, jointly held by Daniel Marsh and David Hale of Meridian Logistics." She looked at the Meridian representatives at the table. "Mr. Hale is the candidate proposed for the co-CEO role that would be created under a restructured merger agreement. This LLC holds co-invested positions in 3 infrastructure asset groups: Those assets increase significantly in value if Mr. Hale holds operational authority in the merged entity. She paused. The financial interest is approximately $4 million at current projections. Silence. Not the polite conference room silence of people waiting their turn. The real kind. Daniel said, "Charlotte, I'm not finished," she said. Without heat. Without anything except the particular stillness of someone who has finally decided to see clearly. She turned to the fourth section. This one she hadn't shown Ethan the night before. He watched her set it on the table and felt something shift in his chest that he didn't entirely understand yet. "The last section," she said, "is a personal statement from me, and I want to be clear that it belongs in this record." She looked at the room. "Yes, I asked Ethan Cross to act as my fiancé to satisfy the stability clause. Yes, the arrangement was initially contractual. I want everyone in this room to understand why." She paused. "The clause was designed to exploit what my company's enemies have always believed was my vulnerability. That I am alone, that I have no personal life, that I can be isolated. I responded to that by finding someone I could trust. I didn't expect to find someone who was actually trustworthy." Her voice didn't change register, but something in it shifted. "What I can tell you is that in 6 weeks, Ethan Cross attended a shareholder dinner and answered every question Martin Foss asked with more honesty than I've heard in this room in years. He drove 40 minutes at 7 a.m. to help me understand a document my own legal team had missed. He showed up, without being asked, to every hard thing." She stopped. "My 8-year-old daughter drew him a picture. I have it on my desk. I don't know what to do with any of that yet, but I know it's real, and I know it's not a strategy, and I know that matters more than whatever this board thinks it means for the stability clause." The room was very quiet. Ethan was standing at the back wall with his hands in his jacket pockets, and he was looking at the back of Charlotte's head, and he was not, for once, thinking about structures or how things failed. He was thinking about the kitchen table with the uneven leg and Saturday mornings, and Ava pouring orange juice for a stranger without being asked, the automatic generosity of a child who lived in a home where that was just what you did. Patricia Okafor said, "I'd like to call for a procedural motion." Daniel said, "I think we should—" "Daniel." Patricia looked at him. Her voice was not unkind. It was simply final. "I think you should be quiet." She moved to suspend Daniel Marsh's board participation pending a formal governance review. The vote was called. It passed 6-1. Daniel, voting against himself, which had a kind of terrible dignity to it, the last move of a man who'd played every card and run out. Daniel stood. He looked at Charlotte, not with anger, which Ethan had expected, but with something harder to read. Something like grief, or like the face a person made when they recognized the exact moment they became the thing they'd spent their career warning others against. "Your father would have handled this differently," he said. Charlotte held his gaze. "My father trusted you," she said. "I trusted you too, for a long time. I think that's actually the difference." Daniel picked up his folder and walked out, and the room watched him go, and nobody said anything until the door closed. Then Martin Foss cleared his throat and said, "I think we can proceed to the signing agenda." The formal paperwork would take 3 more days. There were lawyers, and there were documents, and there were conference calls across time zones, and by the time the actual signing ceremony happened on a gray Monday morning, the crisis had already passed in the way that crises passed. Not with a resolution scene, but with a series of practical steps that accumulated until suddenly the thing that had been urgent was just history. Ethan was not at the signing ceremony. Charlotte hadn't asked him to be, and he hadn't offered. His part was done. He was in the shop that Monday, fitting the last drawer slide on the cabinet he'd been working on since before Charlotte had walked through his door. It was finished now. The cabinet, 6 drawers, white oak with hand-cut dovetails, and a finish that would last 20 years if whoever bought it didn't abuse it. He stood back and looked at it in the morning light. His phone buzzed. "Sandra. It's done. Signed 30 minutes ago. Charlotte is in a call with the full executive team, but she wanted you to know." He set the phone down. He looked at the cabinet. He thought about the day she'd shown up, the leather folder, the number on the paper he hadn't picked up. He thought about the shareholder meeting and the 4th section of the folder he hadn't seen assembled. and the things she'd said into a room full of lawyers and executives about an 8-year-old's drawing on her desk. He thought about the conversation she'd said she wanted to have. After Thursday. After the signing. The conversation that wasn't about the merger. That had been a week ago. She hadn't brought it up since. Neither had he. They had both been in the machinery of the final days, and the conversation existed somewhere in the space that would open up once the machinery stopped. He wasn't sure what he would say when they had it. He knew what he felt. He'd known for longer than he wanted to admit, probably since the Saturday morning she'd sat at his kitchen table and looked at his daughter pour a glass of orange juice and gotten the same expression on her face that people got when they encountered something they hadn't known they were looking for. But knowing what he felt and knowing what to do with it were two different things, and he was, by nature, a man who measured twice. The shop phone rang, the landline. Almost nobody used the landline. He picked it up. "It's done," Charlotte said. Her voice was different, not performed, not composed, just bare, the way voices were when something that had been held tightly for a long time was finally set down. "I heard," he said. "Daniel's resignation was accepted this morning. The board is initiating a governance audit. Meridian has formally withdrawn the co-CEO proposal." She paused. "David Hale is under internal review. The LLC is being investigated." "Okay. 4,000 jobs," she said. "In this state. They're okay." "I know." A silence. Not uncomfortable. The kind of silence between people who had been through something together and had not yet fully processed what it meant. "I have a full schedule this week," she said. "Integration meetings, press, the new executive structure. There's a lot." There would be. "But this weekend—" She stopped. He waited. "I was wondering," she said, and the careful executive composure was almost entirely absent now, and what was left was just a 27-year-old woman who had been carrying something very heavy and very alone for a very long time, and was somewhere in the recent past had stopped feeling entirely alone, whether you were making pancakes. He was quiet for a moment. Through the shop window, the street was gray and ordinary in his. "Saturday," he said. 9 o'clock. "I'll bring the orange juice." "Bring the good kind this time," he said. Ava said the last one had too much pulp. He heard something that might have been a laugh, small, real, surprised out of her. "Tell Ava I'll read the label." He hung up the phone. He stood in the shop for a moment, in the smell of linseed oil and pine resin, in the ordinary morning light. Then he put his hands on the finished cabinet and checked the last drawer one more time, and it slid clean and true, the way a good thing did when you'd built it right. And he was satisfied. And the day continued. It was Dana who said it out loud first, on Friday evening, when she came by to drop off Ava after an after-school playdate. She stood in the kitchen doorway while Ava thundered upstairs for her book, and she looked at her brother with the frank assessment she'd been applying to him for 35 years, and she said, "You know this isn't fake anymore." He was cutting an apple. "Dana, I'm not asking. I'm telling you I know." She leaned against the door frame. "I've known since you called me for Theo Park's number at 7 in the morning, and you weren't even slightly upset about it. You were just solving the problem." She paused. "You only get that way when you care about something." He said nothing. "Does she know?" Dana asked. He thought about the shareholder meeting, the fourth section, the drawing on the desk she'd mentioned in a room full of lawyers. "She said something," he said. "At the meeting." "What did she say?" "She said she didn't know what to do with it yet." He set the knife down. "But she knew it was real." Dana was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Well, neither of you are fast." "No." "That's okay," she said. "Real things don't have to be fast." Ava came back downstairs with her book and a question about whether they could have breakfast for dinner, and the conversation ended, and the house settled into its evening, and the apple on the counter waited to be finished, and outside the gutter over the kitchen window held level and solid against the coming November rain. The Saturday after the signing, Charlotte arrived at 9:03 with the orange juice, the kind without pulp, label checked, as promised, and a look on her face that Ethan had not seen before. Not the controlled composure of the boardroom, Not the careful undressing of that composure that had happened slowly over the past 6 weeks. Something else. Something quieter and less managed. The face of a person who had put down a very heavy thing and had not yet decided what to pick up next. Ava was already at the table. She looked at the orange juice, then at Charlotte. No pulp? No pulp, Charlotte said. Ava nodded and moved her glass closer. Ethan was at the stove. He had started the batter earlier, blueberry, the good kind, the recipe Dana had given him 4 years ago that required buttermilk and a specific ratio he still had written on a sticky note inside the cabinet door because he could never remember the proportion by heart. Charlotte sat down, and Ava immediately began telling her about a book she'd started the night before. Something about a girl who discovers her grandmother was a codebreaker in the Second World War. And Charlotte listened with the genuine attention she brought to things Ava told her, which was the full kind, not the nodding while thinking about something else kind. That was one of the things about Charlotte that had arrived in Ethan's chest and stayed there without asking permission. She paid attention. When Ava talked, Charlotte actually listened, followed the details, asked the right questions, remembered things from previous conversations, and looped back to them. A lot of adults performed interest in children. Charlotte just had it, and didn't seem to know she had it, which made it more real. Breakfast was easy in the way it had become easy, the small familiar moves of people who knew where things were in a kitchen, who knew who took pulp and who didn't, who knew Ava needed her syrup in a separate small dish and not poured directly on the pancakes because she liked to dip and not drown, a preference she had explained once with such specificity that both adults had simply accepted it as law. After Ava finished eating, she carried her plate to the sink, which was her job, and then she said she was going upstairs to read, which was her Saturday morning plan when she'd already finished breakfast, and the adults were still at the table with coffee and things unsaid between them. She stopped at the kitchen doorway. Charlotte. Yeah? Are you coming to the science fair? It's in 3 weeks. Ava said it without preamble, the way she said things that mattered to her, directly, without performing casualness. Dad already signed up to bring a project, but he won't tell me what it is. Charlotte looked at Ethan. He kept his expression neutral. If you want me to come, Charlotte said, I'll be there. I want you to come, Ava said, with the simplicity of a child who hadn't yet learned to make wanting things complicated. Then she went upstairs and the sound of her feet on the steps faded, and the kitchen was quiet. Charlotte looked at her coffee. Ethan looked at her. You said you wanted to have a conversation, he said. After Thursday. After the signing. I did say that. It's been a week. I know. She turned the coffee mug slowly in her hands. It was his mug, ceramic, a little chipped on the handle, something Ava had painted for him 2 birthdays ago with his name in uneven letters and a drawing of the workshop that was more impressionistic than accurate. Charlotte had used that mug every Saturday for 5 weeks without comment, and he had never offered her a different one, and she had never asked for one. I've been trying to figure out how to say it, she said. You don't have to figure it out, he said. You can just say it. She looked up. The arrangement is over. Yes. The merger signed. The clause is satisfied. Daniel is gone. There's no professional reason for any of this to continue. She held his gaze. I want you to know that I know that. I'm not confused about the original terms. Okay, he said. But I've been sitting in my apartment this week, she said, in a building that costs more per month than most people make in a year, and it is completely silent, and I have been thinking about... She stopped. I have been thinking about Ava asking if the science fair, and about the gutter you fixed, and about the way you stood at the back of that conference room and didn't flinch, and I have been trying to talk myself into the idea that what I'm feeling is just... She stopped again. Gratitude? Or circumstance? Or the adrenaline of the past 6 weeks settling? Is that what it is? He asked. She was quiet for a long moment. No, she said. He nodded. I'm 27 years old, she said, and I have run a company for 3 years, and I have closed deals on 4 continents, and I have sat across the table from people who were trying to take everything from me, and I have not flinched. She set the coffee mug down. And I am genuinely terrified right now. I know, he said. You know. You've been terrified for about 3 weeks. You just didn't stop moving long enough for it to catch up. He leaned back in his chair. You're not afraid of the merger, or Daniel, or the board, or any of that. You're afraid of this. The kitchen table, Saturday mornings. He paused. Ava asking if you're coming to the science fair like it's already assumed. Charlotte's jaw tightened, not with defense, with the effort of holding something that wanted to move. My father sat at a table like this once, she said, when I was 7. We had a house then. Before the company got big, before the building downtown, we had an actual house with a kitchen table and Saturday mornings. And then the company got big, and the kitchen table became the place where he read contracts and took calls, and the Saturday mornings stopped and... She stopped. I swore I would never do that to someone. Never let someone sit at a table and watch me be somewhere else. So instead you just sat at tables alone, he said. She looked at him. You decided that the answer to that fear was to never have the table in the first place, he said. It wasn't a criticism. He said it the way he said things that were true and needed to be said plainly. No kitchen table, no Saturday mornings, no one to sit there waiting while you're somewhere else. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. Charlotte, he said, I'm a 32-year-old single father who works in his garage and drives a truck that needs a new alternator. I'm not asking you to give up anything. I'm not asking you to be someone different or live in a different way. He held her eyes. But I'd like you to stop treating the kitchen table like a threat. She looked at him for a long time. Outside, the November wind moved through the yard and the gutter held, and the house was quiet, the way houses were quiet when a child was reading upstairs. What are you asking? She said. I'm asking if you'll come to the science fair, he said. Not because it's arranged. Not because it's useful. Because Ava wants you there and I want you there, and that's enough of a reason. Something broke open in Charlotte's face. Not dramatically, not with tears or any of the things that happened in stories when emotion arrived. Just a loosening, the kind that came when a person stopped holding something they'd been holding too long. Her eyes went bright, and she looked down at the chipped coffee mug and she breathed out slowly. I'm not good at this, she said. I know. I forget things. I work too much. I go quiet when I should talk, and I talk when I should go quiet. She looked up. I'm going to be bad at this, Ethan. Not in the ways that are charming, in the ways that are actually hard. I'm aware, he said. I'm also aware that you drove to a workshop on Delwood Avenue because you needed someone who wouldn't be afraid of you, and you've spent 6 weeks being exactly the person I would have expected if I'd known you for years instead of weeks, which means the version of you that's hard to be around is one I haven't actually met yet. He paused. I'm willing to wait. She looked at him for a moment, then she said, I don't want to hurt Ava. Then don't, he said simply. You're not a careless person, Charlotte. You're a person who pays attention. You've been paying attention to her for 6 weeks. Keep doing that. The sound of Ava's feet on the floor above them moved from the bedroom toward the bathroom and back. The ordinary sound of a Saturday morning in a house where someone lived. Charlotte picked up the coffee mug. She held it with both hands the way she'd held it that very first morning she arrived with the orange juice and sat at this table, and she looked at it like it was something she was deciding whether to keep. Okay, she said. Okay, he said. It wasn't a declaration. It wasn't a scene. It was 2 imperfect people at a kitchen table with cold coffee and a chipped mug and a child reading upstairs saying, okay, which was the only word the moment actually needed. The weeks that followed were not a montage. Life did not cooperate with the idea of a clean transformation. There were integration meetings that ran 4 hours past schedule and killed 3 Saturday mornings in November. There was a week when Charlotte didn't call because she was in Frankfurt, and the time difference made it logistically complicated, and she forgot to account for that. And Ethan didn't call either because he was being stubborn in the particular quiet way he was stubborn. And on day 5, Ava said, You're grumpy and Charlotte hasn't texted me back. Did you two have a fight? And he'd said no, and she'd given him the look she'd inherited from somewhere. That level, patient look that meant she knew the answer and was giving him the chance to arrive at it himself. And he'd called Charlotte that evening, and Charlotte had picked up on the first ring. I should have called sooner, Charlotte said. You're busy, he said. That's not an excuse. I know. I'm not making it one. I'm just saying you're busy. Ethan. Her voice from Frankfurt, from a hotel room 6 time zones away. I'm sorry. Yeah, he said. Me too. It was awkward for a few days after she came back, the particular awkwardness of people who have had a small rupture and are navigating back to each other without a map. They had dinner once that week, the three of them, and Ava talked constantly, which she only did when she was managing the atmosphere of a table, a skill she had apparently developed sometime around age 6 and deployed with the instinct of a natural diplomat. By the second week of December, it had mostly smoothed out, not because the underlying complications had disappeared, but because they were both, in their own ways, people who preferred to work through a problem than around it. Charlotte started blocking Saturday mornings in her calendar as non-negotiable. Ethan started telling her when something bothered him instead of going quiet and waiting for her to notice. These were small adjustments. They were also not small at all. The science fair was on a Thursday evening in mid-December. Ethan brought a small section of cabinet in progress, just the frame and 2 drawers so the kids could see how the joints worked, and spent 45 minutes at Ava's table demonstrating dovetail joinery to 8-year-olds who were variously fascinated, confused, and primarily interested in whether they could touch the tools. He let them touch the tools, supervised, which made him very popular. Ava's project was about the structural properties of different wood species under compression loads. She had built it with him over 3 weekends, pressing weighted blocks onto samples of pine, oak, maple, and poplar until they showed stress fractures, and had charted the results in careful handwriting on poster board with a title that said, "Why Wood Matters. Not all trees are built the same." Ms. Peterson stood in front of it for a long time. Charlotte arrived at 6:15, which was slightly late because of a call that ran over, and she came through the gymnasium door with her coat still on and her work bag over her shoulder and found their table by locating Ava, who was explaining compression fractures to 2 boys with the patience of someone who had thought carefully about how to explain something and was now doing it. Charlotte stood at the edge of the table and listened. When Ava finished, she looked up and saw Charlotte and said, "You made it." "I told you I would," Charlotte said. "Lots of people say they will," Ava said, in a way that was not a rebuke. It was just Ava, who cataloged patterns and reported on them accurately. "You actually did." Charlotte set her bag down and took off her coat and looked at the poster board. She read it, all of it, with the same full attention she brought to merger documents and board presentations. Then she said, "Poplar failed at the lowest compression load." "It's a softer wood," Ava said, "but it's lighter, so it depends on what you need it for. You wouldn't use poplar for a load-bearing joint, but you'd use it for drawer bottoms because it doesn't need to be strong. It just needs to be stable." Charlotte looked at Ethan. He shrugged. She figured that out herself. "The right material for the right purpose," Charlotte said to Ava. "Yeah," Ava said. "That's what Dad says about wood. The worst mistake is using the wrong thing because it looks right." Charlotte was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "That's good advice for a lot of things." Ava nodded seriously. "I know. I think that's why he says it." Boss. The question of what Charlotte and Ethan actually were to each other resolved itself the way real things resolved. Not with a single moment, but with an accumulation of moments until the question stopped needing to be asked. She was there for the Christmas break, or most of it. She flew to see her mother in Portland for 4 days, which she did every year with the mix of obligation and genuine need that most people felt about their families, and she called from there twice. And the second time Ava asked to talk to her, and they had a 20-minute conversation that Ethan did not listen to because some conversations deserved their privacy. She was there for New Year's. Not a party. Ethan did not do parties, and Charlotte had been to enough industry parties to have a thorough and abiding distaste for them. They made dinner in the house, the 3 of them, and Ava was allowed to stay up until midnight because it was a special occasion, and she lasted until 10:47, when she fell asleep on the couch between them with her head on Charlotte's arm in the unself-conscious way children fell asleep when they felt entirely safe. Charlotte sat very still when it happened. Ethan watched her not move, watched her look down at Ava's sleeping face with an expression he had seen once before. At the kitchen table the first Saturday morning, when Ava had poured the orange juice without being asked. The expression of someone who had encountered something they hadn't known they were looking for and did not yet know what to do with having found it. "She trusts you," he said quietly. "I know," Charlotte said. Her voice was very low. "I don't want to let her down." "You won't." "You don't know that." I know it the same way I know a good joint will hold, he said. Not because nothing can go wrong, because the construction is right. He paused. You show up. You pay attention. That's the construction. Charlotte looked at him across the sleeping child. You make it sound simple. It is simple. It's just not easy. He paused. There's a difference. She was quiet for a moment. Outside, somewhere in the neighborhood, someone was setting off small fireworks. Not impressive ones. The illegal sparkler variety that teenagers bought before New Year's and set off in parking lots. The distant pop and fizz of a celebration observed from a distance. Ethan, she said. Yeah. She was still looking at him over Ava. In the low light of the living room in the last hour of the old year, she looked like herself in the way she had learned to look like herself around him, without the management, without the composure she wore in rooms where being readable was dangerous. Just Charlotte, 27 years old, not enough sleep, a company to run, a family she was in the middle of and hadn't named yet. I love her, she said, quietly, simply, like it had been true for a while and she was just now saying it out loud. I love this kid. I don't know exactly when it happened, but it did. He didn't say anything. And I love... She stopped. She looked at him with the specific terror of someone standing at the edge of the only thing they haven't yet been willing to risk. I love you. I know it's probably too fast or not the right... Charlotte, he said, moment, and I know we're sitting on a couch with a sleeping child between us on New Year's Eve, which is probably not... Charlotte, she stopped. I know, he said. She blinked. You know? I've known for a while. He looked at her steadily. I was waiting for you to catch up. She stared at him. You were waiting? You needed to get there yourself. If I'd said it first, you'd have spent 6 weeks analyzing whether you actually felt it or were just responding to being told. He paused. You needed to find out it was real before I confirmed it. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, That is the most infuriating thing anyone has ever said to me. Is it wrong? A long pause. No, she said. It's not wrong. He reached across Ava and took Charlotte's hand, and she let him, and they sat there in the last hour of the year in a house on Delwood Avenue with a sleeping child between them, and cold coffee on the table, and a workshop in the garage that smelled like pine resin. And it was not perfect, and it was not a picture, and it was exactly right. The thing about the story of Ethan Cross and Charlotte Vaughn, if you were to tell it from outside, which is the only honest way to tell any story, is that it does not have the shape people expect. People expect the story of the carpenter and the CEO to be about worlds colliding, about a woman who had everything learning to value what she'd overlooked, about class and money and the corrective power of simplicity. Those stories exist, and they serve a purpose, and they are not entirely wrong. But the real thing, the actual thing, was smaller and more specific than any of that. It was about two people who were, each in their own way, afraid of the same thing. Not failure, not loss, not the ordinary dangers. They were afraid of the table, the kitchen table, the unremarkable, repeated, ordinary fact of coming home to people who were expecting you. Charlotte had been afraid of it because her father had disappeared into his work, and she had learned, early and well, that loving a table and loving a company were competing ambitions, and only one of them was survivable. So she had chosen the company and arranged her life so that there was no table to miss. Ethan had been afraid of it because he had sat at a table with a woman he loved and watched that table become the place where everything fell apart. And when it was over, he had built his own and filled it with his daughter and his work and told himself that was enough. And it was enough. And he had also been careful not to let it become something that could break. What neither of them had accounted for was an 8-year-old with a list of things that needed fixing and an unselfconscious habit of pouring orange juice for strangers. Ava Cross had not set out to change anything. She was 8, and she was interested in books and wood joints and compression loads, and whether the crackers in her lunch were the right kind. She had not performed warmth for Charlotte. She had simply included her, the same way she included the library books she was reading and the notes she left on the fridge and the chore chart on the wall, as part of the ordinary operation of her world. And Charlotte, who had spent her professional life in rooms where every gesture was calculated and every relationship was strategic, had walked into that kitchen and encountered something she had no framework for, something that wanted nothing from her. That was the thing about Ava. She didn't want anything from Charlotte except what Charlotte was. She asked her questions because she was curious. She saved her a seat at the science fair because she wanted her there. She fell asleep with her head on Charlotte's arm because it was comfortable. None of it was a transaction. For a woman who had spent 7 years in a world where everything was a transaction, this was, quietly and without announcement, the most radical thing that had ever happened to her. They were married in September, 11 months after Charlotte had walked into the workshop on Delwood Avenue with a leather folder and a proposition. It was not a large wedding. Charlotte had been offered large. Her board had made clear they considered a significant ceremony appropriate to her profile, and 2 event companies had sent unsolicited proposals, and she had declined all of it with the brevity she brought to decisions she had already made. What they had instead was 40 people in the backyard of the Delwood Avenue house, which Ethan had spent 3 months renovating from the inside out because it was their house now, not a rental, and it needed to be right. He had rebuilt the back deck himself. New boards, properly spaced, with a railing that was level on both sides. Ava had inspected it. It passed. Dana was there, with her husband and her 3 kids, who occupied Ava's attention for most of the afternoon in the way that cousins did. Sandra was there, in a green dress that she said she'd been waiting for an appropriate occasion to wear for 2 years. Martin Foss had flown in from Vancouver, which nobody had expected, and he shook Ethan's hand at the door and said, "I told Charlotte I liked you. I'm rarely wrong about that." Grace Lim attended by video from Singapore and cried, which she would deny if asked. Charlotte's mother flew in from Portland. She was 63, quiet, with Charlotte's eyes and a directness that made it clear where Charlotte had learned hers. She spent 20 minutes with Ethan in the workshop before the ceremony, looking at the work, asking questions about joinery that were better than most people's questions. At the end, she said, "My daughter is not easy." He said, "I know." She said, "Good. I wanted to make sure you knew." Patricia Okafor came. She brought wine that was too good for a backyard party and presented it without apology. The ceremony was short. Neither of them was interested in speeches that went on. They stood in the backyard in the September afternoon, and they said what they meant in the plainest language they had, and the 40 people who knew them well enough to be there witnessed it, and that was enough. Ava was the flower girl, which she had agreed to on the condition that she could also give a short speech. She had negotiated this with the seriousness she brought to most negotiations, and nobody had said no because nobody said no to Ava when she had the look. Her speech was 4 sentences. Charlotte came to our house because she needed help. My dad helped her. Then she started making pancakes with us on Saturdays. That's how I knew she was going to stay. That was it. 4 sentences. Dana cried. Martin Foss looked at the sky for a moment. Charlotte, standing next to Ethan, looked at his daughter. Her daughter, now, in every way that mattered and in the legal way that would follow in 3 months when the paperwork was finalized, and felt something that she had been feeling for almost a year without knowing what to call it. She called it home. That was the word. She had been building toward home without knowing it was what she was building toward. And here it was, 40 people in a backyard, a kid in a flower girl dress with a list in her pocket, a man who had sawdust under his fingernails even today because he'd been in the shop that morning until 9 and hadn't scrubbed well enough. She had run a company. She had closed a merger that employed 30,000 people across 14 countries. She had stood in a boardroom and dismantled a betrayal 7 years in the making. She had done all of it. None of it felt like this. 1 year after the wedding, 2 years after the October evening, a black Audi had pulled up to a workshop on Delwood Avenue. Ethan Cross and Charlotte Vaughn Cross sat at the kitchen table on a Saturday morning, and the table had 6 chairs now because Ava had pointed out that they regularly needed more than 4, and it was inefficient. The gutter was still holding. He'd touched it up in the spring. Ava was 9 now, which had not slowed her down. She was in a differentiated reading program at school and had started a small lending library in her classroom, which Ms. Peterson had encouraged, and which had expanded to include books Ava sourced from the public library's discard bin and repaired at the workshop with her father on weekend mornings. Charlotte had funded the purchase of a proper small bookshelf for the classroom, which Ethan had built, which Ava had painted, which Ms. Peterson had said was the nicest thing anyone had ever done for her classroom in 14 years. The merger had held. The combined entity was operating across all 14 projected markets, and the infrastructure expansion in the state had exceeded employment projections by 8%. Charlotte ran it with the same precision and depth she had always brought, plus something she hadn't had before, a clearer sense of what she was building it for. Not for herself, not for her father's memory, though she carried that too. For the ordinary Tuesday evenings that the people who worked for her were able to have because they had jobs. For the tables they came home to. She had said this in a profile interview 6 months after the merger, and it had been widely quoted, and Sandra had texted her a screenshot with the message. Your father would have said something like that. Charlotte had read it 3 times and then put her phone down and gone to the kitchen where Ethan was making dinner and stood next to him at the stove without saying anything for a moment. And he had made room for her the way he made room for her, quietly, without ceremony, as if she had always stood there. There was a drawing on Charlotte's office wall now. Next to the blueprint of her father's first warehouse, the one from 1987, the 6 employees and 2 trucks, there was a child's drawing in crayon, a house, a workshop, 3 figures in the yard, the word family written in uneven letters at the top. Ava had made it when she was 8, just weeks into a Saturday morning arrangement that hadn't had a name yet. Charlotte had taken it from the kitchen fridge when they moved it to her office. Not as a display, not as a statement, just because it belonged there, because it was the truest thing on the wall. The community fund had been Ava's idea, technically. She had asked, at dinner one evening, why some of her classmates didn't have books at home, and Charlotte had explained that some families didn't have the resources, and Ava had said, "Can't we do something about that?" With the directness of a child who did not yet know that doing something about things was supposed to be complicated. It turned out not to be that complicated. Vaughn Group's charitable foundation partnered with Cross Woodcraft, which had expanded in the past year to include 2 employees in a larger space 2 blocks down, to fund a family resource program that provided books, household repair assistance, and workshop skills classes to families in the district. It was small. It reached about 300 families in the first year. Ava had named it. She had named it the Repair Log. When Charlotte heard the name, she had stood very still for a moment, in the way she went still when something reached her that she hadn't been braced for. Then she had looked at Ethan, who was watching his daughter with the expression he wore when she exceeded him, which was regularly. "She didn't know about your father's notebook," Ethan said. "I know," Charlotte said. "She came up with it herself." "I know," Charlotte said again. Her voice was steady, and something in her eyes was not. "That's what makes it. That's why it—" She stopped. He put his arm around her. She leaned into it, which she had learned to do without the microsecond of resistance she'd had at first. The old reflex of someone who had managed herself alone for so long that being held required conscious permission. She leaned into it and stayed there. Ava looked up from her drawing. She was always drawing, always making something, and saw them and said nothing, because she was 9 and she understood that some moments were not for commenting on. She went back to her drawing. It was of the workshop approximately, with a figure inside at the bench and another figure in the doorway, and a third one small and precise in the yard. And above it she was writing a title in the careful handwriting she'd been working on since 2nd grade. Ethan watched her write. He couldn't see what the title was from where he stood. He went to make coffee. Charlotte sat down at the table. Outside, the November morning was gray and cold and exact. The gutter held. The deck boards were level. The workshop smelled like pine resin and linseed oil, and a little bit like the wood glue Ava had used the previous weekend when she'd decided to repair a cracked drawer bottom herself and had done it correctly on the first try. When he brought the coffee back, Ava was done with the title. She held up the drawing. It said, "Home is not a place. It is who is there when you come back." He looked at it for a moment. Then he looked at his daughter, who was looking at the drawing with the critical eye of an artist reviewing her own work. "Where did you get that?" he said. "I thought of it," she said. "By yourself?" "I was thinking about Charlotte coming back from Frankfurt," Ava said. She set the drawing down. "And then I was thinking about when you come in from the shop at night." and how I always know which footsteps are yours. She picked up her pencil. It's the same thing. You come back. That's how I know it's home. The kitchen was quiet. Charlotte had both hands around the chipped coffee mug with Ethan's name on it, the one she had been using every Saturday for 2 years, the one she would have described, if asked, as her mug, and maybe it was by now. Her eyes were bright, and she was looking at Ava with the expression she had worn the first morning in this kitchen, the one that had arrived in her without permission, the one she hadn't had a word for yet. She had the word now. She had had it for a while. Ethan sat down. He reached across the table and turned the drawing toward him and looked at it. The 3 figures, the workshop, the yard, the title in his daughter's careful handwriting. He thought about what it had cost to arrive here. Not money. The other currency. The willingness to stay when staying was hard. The choice to trust when trust was a risk. The ordinary courage of people who keep coming back to the table. He thought about what Dana had said the night after Charlotte's first Saturday. Real things don't have to be fast. He thought about the 6-month gray period that had ended the day he decided to build something, and about the October evening a woman had knocked on his workshop door and told him she needed someone who wasn't afraid of her, and about every ordinary morning since that had added itself to every other ordinary morning until they had built, without fully intending to, a life. He thought, this is what a good joint looks like. Not perfect, just strong in the places that need to hold. He turned the drawing back toward Ava. It's good, he said. She nodded. I know, she said, and went back to work. The coffee cooled. The morning passed. Outside, the neighborhood woke up the way neighborhoods did. Dog walkers, a car starting, the distant sound of someone's leaf blower fighting the losing battle of November. Inside, 3 people at a kitchen table on Delwood Avenue, living the ordinary life that had been waiting the whole time underneath all of it. The door to the workshop was closed. The sign over it read, Cross Woodcraft. Sometime next spring, Ava had said, they should probably add another name. Nobody had disagreed.